Thank you for being here. I now have the pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker, Greg Mullins, an internationally recognised expert in responding to major bushfires and natural disasters, and distinguished advocate for strong climate action. Indeed, he's so passionate about climate change that he is a climate counsellor with the Climate Council and the founder of Emergency Leaders for Climate Action. Greg has over 50 years of experience in firefighting. He has coordinated responses to major natural disasters over more than 2 decades and retired as Commissioner of Fire and Rescue New South Wales after nearly 14 years in the role. His outstanding service to the community has been recognised with an Order of Australia and the Australian Fire Service Medal. Tonight he sheds light on the crucial role of trees amidst climate change-induced events. Please welcome Greg Mullins, who will discuss risk, our saviours, trees, bushfires and climate change.
Thanks, David. Wow, what an enthusiastic audience. And look, if you're ever speaking somewhere, my advice is bring 10% of the audience with you. So I brought my sister and my daughter. So look, thanks very much for that. I'm going to try something a little bit different tonight, and I hope you'll bear with me. Does anyone like watching police shows and courtroom dramas and things like that? Does anyone like that? I hope so. Oh, thank God, there's at least 2 or 3. So I'm going to have a little mock trial tonight. So I'm witness for the defence, and the defendants are trees. They're charged with malicious damage, grievous bodily harm, and manslaughter. So, and I'm going to present the defence arguments on behalf of them. And look, I shouldn't name names, but the people who made the complaints are people like Barnaby Joyce, Sky News and the Murdoch Press, who have a certain view of the world, and so they've got to blame, they can't blame climate change for anything, so they have to blame something else. They've got to have somebody else. And trees are the bad guys in this. So that's going to be how I roll. But before I get into that, I want to acknowledge, it's essential that we acknowledge that we're on the land of the Gummaduggal people. Pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, and any people of Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander descent who are with us tonight. But I also want to really acknowledge that we almost lost tens of thousands of years of scientific knowledge about how to manage our forests and our lands and our ecology, animals, and how everything worked together, because soon after the first fleet arrived around here, smallpox epidemic killed lots of the Indigenous owners, others were driven away, and we started clearing the forests and just imposing a European view of the world. And part of that was a European view of fire. Fire is bad, must be excluded. And that started some bad things happening in the environment. Look, a little bit about my background. Why am I passionate about this? I started fighting fires when I was 12 years old with my dad, who was a volunteer firefighter up at Terry Hills. We lived over the road from the fire station. My whole family, to here, very active in the community, activism for the environment. Mum and Dad were keen bush regenerators. I'm a bush regenerator. But being out in the bush has been vitally important to me and my family since I can remember, from being a little person. So my background in fire, of course, goes back to 1972. I was in Fire and Rescue New South Wales for around 40 years. I returned to the now RFS, it was the Bushfire Brigades when I was a kid, when I was a teenager. I'm a deputy group captain in Northern Beaches Rural Fire Service now. But those pictures, the one over there, that's New Year's Eve in Bateman's Bay. That was a horrible day. I saw what was happening in Black Summer. I'd been advocating for climate action and more action to assist firefighters and communities from the federal government at the time, who couldn't allow themselves to listen because they had an ideological position on climate. And that day shattered me pretty much. seeing hundreds of homes burning, not being able to do much about it, and being under a pyroconvective storm, which is not a nice place to be. So that's my background, and that's where I come from. I've studied bushfire fighting in France, Spain, Canada, the US. I've fought fires in the US, and so I'm pretty much across what's happening around the world. And David, you're going to have to keep me to time because I haven't got a watch. So if you could give a secret signal when I'm starting to go over, just go something like that. It's very subtle, and then I'll know. So to the defence. Now, you're the members of the jury, and I'm going to try to demonstrate to you that firstly, trees are just an innocent bystander in what's happening. And the escalating threat environment that's building around us, trees can in fact be our saviours. So rather than being the guilty parties, I'm going to put to you that they were just sort of hanging around when the crimes happened, and the crimes were due to another party, the human race, and we really need to look after our trees. Don't send them to jail. First, a little bit of background. What this graph shows is prior to the Industrial Revolution, I won't get into too much technical detail, and a lot of you know this anyway, but carbon dioxide, the proportions in the atmosphere are about 280 parts per million, not much. And I remember saying to a radio announcer, a well-known radio announcer in Sydney, he was trying to tell me that it meant nothing because it was so small, and I said, well, try a bit of cyanide, you only need a little bit, and tell me how you feel tomorrow. And he didn't enjoy that. But it's now around 420 parts per million, or it's above that. And we've known since 1859, I think, anyways, a Scottish physicist, and I've forgotten his name, but he postulated back then that CO2 traps heat. He showed through experimentation that CO2 traps heat. And he said if we increase the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, the world will warm up. And by turn of the century, about 1902, they came up with the word greenhouse effect because it had been proven and it was known. So anyone who says, the science isn't settled, gets their science from TikTok and Google and Wikipedia, not from credible sources. So what's happened, those red lines, as the CO2 has gone up, so too has the temperature of the planet. So now what happens when you warm things? As learned members of the jury, you'd be familiar with bell curves, and the news today, I don't know if you heard, there's been a massive increase in heat waves and hot days across the world. Ecuador, most people in Ecuador experienced 180 extreme heat days last year. So they eliminated the effects of climate change and said there should have been 10. There should have been 10. So the heating is speeding up. We're a bit less because we've been through a La Nina period and it's cooled down a bit. Now, people get confused by statements about average temperature rises and 1.5 degrees. People think 1.5 degrees, so what's that difference between 30 and 31.5? Yeah, you would understand that. This is where it gets a little bit confusing for some members of the public, but an average increase of just a tiny bit moves that bell curve to there, and you get more extreme events and more extreme heat. And extreme heat is driving extreme weather events. So not only bushfires, but we're getting flash droughts. Flash droughts weren't even recognised in the science until the year 2000, but that means short periods of extreme heat with massive evaporation. All of a sudden you're in hydrological drought. There's not enough water around and plants start to dry out and burn more fiercely. So that happens very quickly. We also get more. I heard a question in the last session about rainfall. More of our rain now is in violent downbursts that often just runs off the top because for every 1 degree increase in temperature, the atmosphere holds 7% more water. So we're at about 1.5 in Australia, so it's over 10% more moisture in the atmosphere. So when the conditions are right, we get the massive downpours like we saw in 2021, 2022. Lismore, no one in the emergency services game or flood research could have predicted or would have predicted that you'd beat a historic flood high by 2 metres, maybe 2 centimetres. 2 metres was just off the scale, unbelievable, and it's happening around the world. So that's the bell curve. So what's this doing to bushfire risk? Oh, can everyone hear me when I wander over here and bounce around? Good, it's a small room. Now, the prosecution have been blaming trees and tree-hugging greenies like me. And I remember one of my favourite quotes during the Black Summer fires was from the Deputy Prime Minister of Australia, who said that I think we're in a city, woke inner city latte sipping greenies or something or other, and I'm very proud of that, but I don't drink latte because my cholesterol's up a bit, so I have long black. But they blamed a whole lot of things. There was a whole lot of misinformation around that I won't go into tonight. But one of them was that, trees, bush, it was all primed to go because the greenies wouldn't allow back burning. And when you hear someone say back burning, you know they haven't got a clue what they're talking about. They've been reading Wikipedia and Google and Facebook and the rest. It's hazard reduction burning. Sorry, Barnaby. I can't talk about Barnaby. I've got this thing about Barnaby, but anyway, I just... sorry, Barnaby. No, don't. But I know from experience that after every bushfire season, some people come out and they're terrified of trees. And they think that, trees are going to kill them. And I've been doing some talks on the northern beaches to communities who are just terrified after the Black Summer fires. We've got to cut all these trees down. And it's actually not what you want to do. After 1994, the Lane Cove Valley fires, I was in charge of that fire. There were people who genuinely wanted to cut down all the trees and make it scrubland or grassland. And we had some long talks with those people. It was never going to get up. But that's the fear, genuine fear for genuine reasons that people hold. Now, just the things that are happening, we really need to understand because of that little bit of an average increase in temperature, moving the bell curve, longer fire seasons. So when I was young, the fires wouldn't start till about November. You didn't have property loss fires in the Blue Mountains in Sydney until late November to mid-January. And there was just a little window. We're now losing homes throughout New South Wales from July, August regularly. And the fire seasons can go into April. And what that does too is it stops us from doing a lot of the hazard reduction. A lot of those windows for hazard reduction burning, if we light up, we lose the fires. They become wildfires because we can't handle them because it's so dry, so hot, so windy. Or it rains, we get violent downpours and it's too wet. So that tool is being taken away. The big thing, overlapping fire seasons. They used to be sequential between states, moved from north to south, so we shared fire trucks, people, aircraft. We can't now. Often we're all burning simultaneously. So we have to deal with what we have and we get overrun. We get overpowered by the fires. More days of high fire danger and above, exponentially more in Black Summer than an average year. Reduced rainfall, I talked about that. Drier fuels, we've always had lightning, but there is evidence now that there's more lightning because there's more energy in the system. But fires are more likely to start from lightning because the fuels are so much drier. And we've seen this particularly in Tasmania, in the highlands, the World Heritage areas. And extreme fire behaviour, so fire-generated storms. When I was a young firefighter, it was a bit like Legend of the Yeti. Somebody had seen a fire with a smoke column turned into a storm cloud and lightning came out but no rain, and then incredible winds, and we thought, yeah, sure, it's old-timers being old-timers. I'm now an old-timer, and I saw one, I think, in the late 70s, but then through that Black Summer, I was under several of them. And it's the scariest thing. I didn't think I was coming home, and I didn't think that the people who were with me were going to come home. It was downbursts like a normal thunderstorm, but spreading fire in every direction, trees that big being plucked out of the ground and thrown around. The day before I was in Bateman's Bay, a fire truck on the Victorian border, New South Wales border, picked up, dropped on its roof, killing a young firefighter and burning the rest of the crew severely. And they couldn't get medevaced for about 6 hours because of the incredible conditions. They couldn't get aircraft in. So things have changed. Now, history. We knew something was going wrong from the 1990s. The 1994 fires came out of the blue. You might remember, anyone who can remember back, rained in November heavily around here. We thought, we're through, no worries, because that was the old, Dad used to say to me, if it rains in October, November at the switchover, it'll either go tropical and moist or it'll stay dry and then we'll get the big fires. Well, it went moist. We thought, we're through. And then it just got hot and dry. And we did have a flash drought. If you look back at the figures, we had a flash drought. And by the first week of January, the state was on fire. Lane Cove went up, Terry Hills. We had massive fires. Como Janelli, 100 homes burnt, several lives lost. So I was at Lane Cove Valley, we lost 17 homes, 37 on the northern beaches. It was horrendous, and we were shaking our heads trying to understand what had happened. But then Canberra in 2003, and how am I going for time, David? I've got no idea. What's the time? 20 past. Oh, cool, look it. And if I go right through to 7, then no one can ask hard questions. All right, good. Canberra in 2003 was a real wake-up call. 485 homes. They'd never had massive home loss in Canberra before. They'd had some fires in the 1950s with some losses, but nothing like that. A number of deaths. It was the world's first recorded large-scale fire tornado, and there was a swathe through a couple of suburbs, about 200 metres wide, where every tree was ripped out and just thrown off to the side. A lot of those homes burnt down because the roofs were ripped off and the sparks were dumped inside, set the furnishing alight. And so it was an extreme event. It was the fastest moving bushfire ever recorded in the world, 23 kilometres per hour. That's a very fast grass fire. Grass fires move faster than bushfires because there's less energy needed to heat up grass, so it just moves with the wind. Bushfires take a bit longer, but this thing was a monster, an absolute monster. Then the big shock, while we were scratching our heads and licking our wounds over 2003, 2009 happened in Victoria. Biggest loss of life in a bushfire in Australia ever, 173 people. And Kinglake, the suburb of Kinglake, about 103 died there because of a massive pyroconvective storm. There was nowhere to hide, even on an oval. Everything just burned. It must have been the most frightening, horrible thing for people. That resulted in a major rethinking policy about evacuations. We changed our National Fire Service doctrine. We realised we had to give warnings. We had information. The Royal Commission in Victoria said, you had information, you didn't share it with the public. So we've changed that, and we had a new fire danger rating of catastrophic, which is literally off the scale. Fire danger rating scale was 0 to 100, 0's too wet, 100's extreme, and you can't put fires out when it gets to 100. We had ratings over 220 on that day, and the computers kept counting, and it took about 5 years for fire scientists to work out what some of the video footage was showing, because it was impossible. And there's one particular clip I still watch because I can't understand it. I've been to thousands and thousands of fires around the world, or mainly here, but around the world, and I can't understand how quickly the fire moved. And the scientists sort of get it, but they said there's a tipping point where they're just uncontrollable. So it's not just here. It's who remembers Maui recently? So extreme weather conditions, a flash drought, and just about 100 people killed. The US, I've been to California quite a few times. I've got a lot of friends in the US Fire Services, Californian Fire Services, ex-chiefs. And they watched it getting worse. When I was there in 1995 for a number of months working on fires and studying what they were doing, they said, oh yeah, the firestorm of 1993, we lost 3,000 homes. It'll never get worse than that. 2017, they lost 10,000. And then in 2018, they lost 20,000, including the city of Paradise. So Paradise was no longer Paradise after that fire. It happened early in the morning with gale force, storm force winds. Basically every building in the large town was destroyed. About 100 people lost their lives. And America is firefighter heaven. If you want 20 air tankers, if you want 30 helicopters, pull them up. You want 100 fire engines, 1,000 firefighters, they're all there. And they try to put fires out with money. They can bury it in money. They can do anything over there, and they're losing. They're losing. But the big one to me, I'd consulted with UK fire services a few times over the years. I was asked to go over there in 2006 and 2004 and talk about climate change, help them. They were getting bushfires and they didn't know what to do because they were structure firefighters. July 2022, 41 homes burnt down on the outskirts of London on a 40-degree day. So it's crazy. And I'd put to you, back to you being members of the jury, the prosecution wants you to believe that the defendants, trees, have somehow formed a worldwide conspiracy to attack the most invasive species on the planet, humans, but it's a terribly simplistic argument. Now, where are we going? Just quickly, and I'll get off fires in a second, but back to warming. There's no question scientifically that warming of our planet has increased fire risk and will continue to do so, with one study saying that by 2040, the weather conditions, unprecedented hot, dry, windy weather conditions of the Black Summer will be an average summer. By 2040, that's not long. And by 2060, that summer will be exceedingly cool if we don't start to drive down pollution from coal, the burning of coal, oil and gas. So that's chilling. And if you want to look it up, it's Sanderson and Fisher, 2020, that study. But there's been others since. The IPCC, they're all saying the same things. So, were trees to blame for Black Summer? No. I put it to you, members of the jury, that that's nothing further from the truth, but I need to go into more detail. So I'll unpack this for you quickly. That was a picture I took on the way to Bateman's Bay at about 8 a.m. on New Year's Eve 2019. So very quickly, I'll unpack this for you, but there's some myths I need to bust, because there's people know about fires because they live in Australia, but most don't. And so you'll hear things like, the fire was racing through the tops of the trees and, there was no fire underneath, and it was just, it's actually physically not really possible except for short distances. People think they see stuff like this, like houses exploding. They do see houses or windows exploding, but the house has probably been on fire for half an hour before that happens. It's a thing called flashover. So the house exploded when the fire hit, because the embers had set it alight 20 minutes before, was burning inside, got to the point where everything went bang and the windows blew out. So that's a myth. They don't. If you haven't got a surface fire, you might have flaring, one canopy might go up, but you won't have a running crown fire. Trees are the main factor in bushfire risk. I'll talk about that in a minute, but no, that's wrong. That's blatantly wrong. If we cut down trees close to houses, we eliminate bushfire risk. Well, embers from fires in Black Summer, 8 to 12 kilometres average was where the spot fires were starting from burning embers, because of these extreme winds and because the atmosphere was so dry and didn't extinguish burning leaves, bits of bark, etc. So 400 metres from the flame front, we regularly get homes catch alight, up to 400 metres. So cutting down your trees will just make you hotter in summer. And getting rid of trees makes us safer. I'd argue in a moment it'll make sure that our extinction comes a bit quicker. So ground fuel, you need to understand ground fuel. So if you've got lots of trees but nothing on the ground, you won't get a fire. So, and this is the argument with hazard reduction. I'll get into this in a moment. But ground fuels, ferns, grasses, sticks, twigs, leaves, dead bark, low scrub. That's what you need to carry a fire. And if you haven't got that, it doesn't matter how thick your canopy is, you're not going to get a fire. Now, that's a crown fire. I took that fire at Tinga in the Northern Tablelands in early 2019. And that's where you have... Has this got a laser pointer?
Yeah, that's up.
The red button. Oh, look at that. High tech. So without ladder fuels, we call them ladder fuels, so a higher, like you have the ground fuel down here, and then you have thick scrub reaching up underneath the canopies. Without that ladder fuel, you'll get some flaring maybe, but you won't get huge crown fires like this. So you've got to have those two layers of fuel, very simplistic. So trees on their own aren't going to create fires like that. And it can be managed. I've got a butt there and I'll explain that in a minute. Now that's an area, a hazard reduction burn I was in charge of on Mona Vale Road between Terry Hills and St Ives earlier this year. So that's a hazard reduction burn. We do it under controlled conditions and it takes out that ground fuel. And that would support a fire with flames about 6 inches high. What's 6 inches in centimetres? Oh, I don't know. So it will not support a fast-moving fire. So, back. But the but is our ability to do this hazard reduction work is being eroded through heavy rains or very, very high temperatures and dangerous conditions. So what the University of Wollongong has said to us, the Bushfire Research Hub, is target it near properties and assets at risk, do less burning out in the middle of nowhere because it's not going to do anyone any good. It's just, you really need to have buffers. Now that we've got such extreme conditions regularly, we really need to refocus our hazard reduction strategies. So, all right, that's the fire space. And I'm going to just quickly go through other benefits of trees that should be self-evident. And it appalls me when I see new developments like that. Thankfully not on the North Shore, but I was fighting fires down in Ballarat earlier this year and there were some new developments, not a tree in sight. And it was, so you've got no shade. The heat island effect of urban areas is well known. So concrete, steel, it absorbs heat and the temperature goes up. And so you really need trees. So town planners now are focusing on having green canopies to keep things cooler. And it actually moves water around as well. I'll talk about that in a moment. But so trees are essential, but then, seeing things like this, I feel sorry for those people. It's just ridiculous. Bulldoze everything, build some rubbish houses, sell them for as much as you can, then scoot off and spend the profits. Anyway, so now rain. We're getting seesawing. Climate whiplash, we call it. We go from droughts, fires, heat waves to floods, and we've had, Pakistan, 1,000 people killed last year in floods. There's massive floods happening around the world. We've had ours. Rainfall patterns are changing because of that heat, but not only that, we love to bulldoze things, whether it's koala habitat or we've got this thing about bulldozers, the human race, and the Amazon, was in South America recently, and the deforestation there was just flying over. It was just heartbreaking. They're getting massive fires. Never makes the news here, but when we were there, particularly to me, they'd just lost 26 firefighters in a massive fire, and 1,000 homes didn't even make the news here. And this was last year, early last year. But lots of places, food bowls in the world, the rainfall's changing. The Murray-Darling Basin, it's all changing. And so trees, back to basic high school science, suck up water. The process of photosynthesis, it sucks in CO2. It needs CO2. So green trees love to have lots of CO2, and they store it in the cellulose in the wood. And so on to this one. So not only, back to the last one. So what we're talking about is aerial rivers. Scientists talk about the moisture. Are you shifting, going, your time's nearly up, pal? No? Oh, okay. Don't shift then, Dave. You make me nervous. No. So scientists talk about these aerial rivers, and because the Amazon is being burnt and cut and turned into farmland, they're reducing. And so it's changing the water balance around the world. So went to Borneo some years ago and went up the river, and it was beautiful, and look at the beautiful rainforest. It was only about 1 kilometre wide, and there was palm oil plantations, and they were killing the orangutans that were trying to eat something. They were eating the hearts of the palm trees, so they'd kill them because they're pests. And so that's changing the water balance around the world because we don't have enough trees anymore. And that's Tasmania, the old growth forests. We're still cutting them down. Wife and I were in Tassie last week, and they're cutting down old growth forests as quick as they can because there's a ban coming, and same thing's happening in Victoria. Victoria's put a ban on it. In New South Wales, Forestry Corporation is a money-losing operation, and if we stopped cutting down this wonderful habitat, our budget would be better off, and our carbon budget would be better off because we'd keep pulling in this CO2. So I rest my case. I'd put to you that, as I said, trees aren't the perpetrators; they're victims like us. And I think the human race has a lot to answer for, but there's still things we can do. And one of the big things we can do, we've spent, I don't know if you know, billions of dollars in our taxpayer dollars have gone to certain companies, fossil fuel companies, to do experimental carbon capture and sequestration, and it doesn't bloody work. So if they use those billions of dollars to plant trees, it would actually work. But this is the fallacy of the fairy tale of, look, we can keep burning coal, oil and gas and digging this stuff because it's safe and we'll nail this one day. But it'll be too late. So all the old executives who've lived it up over the years with their Learjets and everything, they won't care because they'll be dead. But we'll be dealing with it still. So I'm not a cynic, am I? A realist. Cynic. And look, I had to throw in that was me on the 8th of January 1994 in Winchester Avenue, Linfield, and that fire just took out the whole street, all the houses, and to the point this poor lady and her dog, the house was on fire and they couldn't get out, and because the street was on fire. So, and I just remember that, and but they rebuilt because they loved the trees and they loved living there and they loved this area, and so do I. So, over to you. Questions?